I knew he was cheating. I only found out because of a receipt that smelled like sunscreen. It was folded into the pocket of his swim trunks. The ones with the ridiculous pineapples I told him looked like a 19-year-old's vacation costume. He came home from a client event on the lake, salted hair still damp and eyes bright with that jangly Sunday fun grin. I did laundry because I was the one who always did laundry. Hands moving on autopilot. Load, sort, small pocket check for receipts and coins and sticky cough drop wrappers. I pulled out a slim rectangle of glossy paper with the name of a boutique hotel printed in gold. It was stamped 1 hour after the time he texted me a photo of a sunset over water. Wish you were here. The line item was for a room, not a drink. 2 keys. He came into the laundry room while I held it. He kissed the top of my head like he always did. He said he was starving, asked if we had any of those honey pretzels. I kept holding the paper. The dog smelled my knee. He turned to leave, saw the paper, and his mouth opened just a fraction before he pulled his face into a smile so practiced it felt like watching someone pull a mask up with invisible strings. Greg booked a room because he partied too hard. I didn't stay. I folded the receipt in half and put it in my back pocket. He stood there with his bare feet, a wet ring of lake around them on the tile that looked like a cartoon puddle of guilt. Except I'm not supposed to turn anything into a cartoon. I walked past him and into the kitchen. I cut a lemon into quarters. I kept thinking of the smell of sunscreen inside that pocket, the way it travels heat and coconut and something chemical that tries too hard to be tropical. I squeezed the lemon over the sink and watched pulp catch in the drain. He followed me. He talked fast. He said, "Greg's wife is crazy. You know that. She was calling nonstop." He said, "I should have told you." He said, "I booked the room for him because the office card was maxed and I owed him after Q1. He said, "I know it looks bad." He reached for my wrist. I stepped away. The lemon juice soaked under my rings. My palms stung where I'd nicked myself last week, trying to pry a jar open with a butter knife. The phone buzzed on the counter. He looked at the screen. He didn't pick it up. It buzzed again, and a preview flashed. Just the first word of a name. It wasn't Greg. I took the dog's leash from the hook by the door and left. I walked circles around the block until the dog sat down and refused to go further. I sat in someone else's front yard and ran my fingers through his fur while he panted and blinked slow at me like, "Finally, you sat down." My neighbor across the street watered her begonias and gave me a little wave. I waved back, felt the receipt crinkle in my pocket, and realized my hands were shaking because I wasn't ready to put it down yet. I went back inside when the sky turned the color of grapefruit rind and flies started bumping the kitchen window. He was at the table, elbows on the wood, a bowl of chips untouched in front of him like a prop nobody told him to move. He said, "I'm sorry." He said it like he says sorry when he's late, like he says sorry when he leaves his muddy shoes by the door, like he says sorry when he forgets to file a form or send his mom a card. He said it like a word that means let it go. I didn't say anything. I slid the receipt across the table like a dealer performing a trick. He didn't pick it up. He rubbed his eyebrow. It's something he does when he lies, but I'm not going to pretend I've known it all along. I stared. He picked up the chip and set it back down. The phone on the counter buzzed again. The preview showed the full name this time. I saw her first name, and my stomach didn't drop. There wasn't any cinematic downturn. It was quiet in my head like somebody pressed down on the mute button. I asked, "How long?" He said, "I swear, it just happened." And then, in the same breath, "We've been working late a lot and it was just..." He stopped. He tried again. "It wasn't supposed to be anything. I didn't plan it." He spread his hands, palms up, like evidence. "It's nothing. It was never nothing." That's the part that would keep unspooling later. The way nothing was always something, just wrapped in polite language and easy jokes and free-floating excuses. But I'm not doing foreshadowing. I'm keeping to right there in that kitchen. Lemon pulp in the drain, dog panting at my shins, my hands held like I was holding grocery bags that were about to tear. I called my sister. She answered while loading her kids into a minivan that always smelled like cheese crackers and wipes. She said, "What's up?" The way people ask when they know you wouldn't just be calling at 9 p.m. on a Sunday to chat. I told her. She said, okay. She said, "Do you want me to come?" She said, "I'll come." She didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't ask if he was sure. She came with a duffel bag and a look that said, "We were going to get through this by doing the next logical thing, and then the next one after that." She hugged me in the driveway. He stood in the kitchen doorway like someone watching weather move across their lawn from the safety of a covered porch. She slept on the couch. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a YouTube yoga teacher whispering, "Inhale," in the living room. My sister closed her laptop and pressed a mug of coffee into my hands. It had lipstick on the rim from last night's glass of wine. She said, "You can stay, you can leave, you can change the locks, you can go to mom's, you can go to mine, you can do nothing for a week." She said, "No wrong choices except the one where you pretend this didn't happen." I made a list because lists are a way to convince the brain there is structure. I wrote, "Get a health checkup," because all the advice threads I'd read in the past about other people's disasters said to do it, even if there was no reason to think it mattered. I wrote, "Fine lawyer," even though my entire body recoiled from the word. I wrote, "Call therapist," even though I'd been out of therapy for 2 years and had told myself that meant I was better, as if healing was a train you catch, and then you're just in another city now. He went to work. He texted me throughout the day, versions of the same thing. "Please let me fix this. "Can we talk? I love you. I'm sorry." It was like watching him throw pebbles at a window he already cracked. I turned off the sound and watched the little moons appear on each text as I ignored them. He came home early and his mother called my phone when he didn't answer hers. She said, "Sweetheart," in that voice she uses like powdered sugar on a lemon bar, a little too sweet and sifted to disguise the knife underneath. She said, What's going on?" She said, "He loves you." She said, "Men make mistakes. Doesn't mean he's not a good man." She said, "Your father did worse and your mother stayed." It was like she threw a family grenade into my lap and walked away. I said, "I'm hanging up now." I hung up. 2 days later, I went to a clinic in a medical plaza next to a nail salon and a PHO place. The nurse asked how long I'd been with my partner. I told her too long for this to be the form I was filling out. She nodded like she had a drawer of expressions she opened and closed all day, picking the right one for each human who walked in. She ran a few routine checks. She asked if I felt safe at home. I said yes. Safety is a shapeshifter, but no one was hitting anyone. Physicality never showed up. We both did damage through words said and not said. When the nurse left, I stared at a poster about birth control and tried to calculate how many years of my life had been built on the idea that if you excel hard enough at being reasonable, life won't blindside you. That equation was not holding. He slept in the guest room. I slept without sleeping, and then I slept and woke up with a headache like I'd been clenching every muscle in my neck. I went to work and didn't tell anyone. I answered 18 emails. I said, per my last note, more times than I breathed. At lunch, I walked to the river and watched water knead itself against the concrete pilings on the edge of the trail. An old man fed ducks even though the sign said not to. The ducks didn't care about municipal regulations. They took bread from his palm with tiny hits of beak the man didn't even flinch at. I confronted him the next night with a notepad because I knew if I didn't anchor myself to specific questions, I'd cycle into the cloud of everything and nothing. I asked, "How many times?" He looked at the ceiling like answers were pinned up there. 3. It was more than 3 later, but in that moment it was 3. I wrote the number down like I was recording something in a ledger. I asked, "Who?" He said a name. It was the woman whose name had been on his phone screen. She worked in his office, not his direct report, but adjacent enough that I had met her at a Christmas party and complimented her dress because it looked like it had been made for her. She was tall and wore lipstick the color of cinnamon sticks. I remember the exact shape of her laugh, crisp and warm and practiced, with a head tilt that made you feel like you were a good audience. "Was she at the hotel?" I asked. "Yes." "Did you take precautions?" I asked. He winced. "Yes." I wrote the word down like that was going to prevent anything from still feeling contaminated. He said he wanted to fix it. He said he was willing to do counseling, to do whatever I needed. He said he'd cut it off. He said, "I'll quit," like a man slamming an emergency brake. He said it loud enough that I wondered if he was trying to convince the walls. I called a therapist whose voicemail sounded like the wind inside a seashell. She had an opening for new clients. I cried when the receptionist said my name back to me to confirm the appointment because it sounded like I had a right to take up an hour of a stranger's time. The first session, I spoke in paragraphs like I was on trial, and there was a court reporter in the corner. The therapist smiled with her eyes at the right times and asked me what I wanted. No one had asked me that in a long time without attaching it to a narrow menu of options. Her office had a droopy snake plant and 2 paintings of chairs in empty rooms. I told her about the list in the kitchen and the lemon juice and the dog. I told her about the receipt and the smell of sunscreen. I told her about his mother making my reaction my mother's problem. She asked me what happens to me when I feel abandoned. The word made me flinch even though I used it all the time for other people. I told her I turned into an appliance. I performed tasks. I stacked dishes and met deadlines and made sure my own soft parts weren't visible. I told her this felt like standing in a store at closing time and realizing I hadn't bought any of the things I came for. She asked me what I came for. I looked at the painting of the empty chair and realized I didn't have a ready-made answer. I said, "Peace," because it was the easiest clean word. I said, "Truth," because the mess needs a towel. I said, "Options." We tried counseling with him. He cried. He stared at the floor and said he didn't know why he did it. He said he felt empty sometimes and liked how she made him feel wanted. The therapist blinked twice and asked if he had felt unwanted at home. He said, no, like that question offended him. When the therapist tricked him, softly, kindly, into admitting he had started texting her months earlier, my fingers went cold. He admitted he had taken her out to lunch 3 times on busy days, sitting on the patio of a place with string lights and sharing fries with his hands like a teenager. I pictured him licking salt off his thumb and wiping the grease on a napkin and looking around to see if anyone he knew was there. He said he didn't want to lose me. He said he would block her. He said he would change his number. He handed me his phone when we got home and I scrolled through deleted messages he didn't know I could recover. Little phrases that felt like someone else had been living inside my apartment while I was at work. I asked him to move out. He packed a duffel and a garbage bag full of clothes. He took the pineapple trunks. He left his favorite mug. He cried at the door and asked if I was sure. He hugged me like a man hugging a monument. He left. I sat at the kitchen table and realized the table had 4 chairs, when I only needed 1. I googled lawyers while the dog pressed his chin on my thigh and made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a question. His mother called again. She said I was embarrassing the family by making things public. Public meaning I had told my sister and my therapist and a lawyer I didn't know. She said she had never liked the way I talked about relationships. too clinical and cold. She said I needed to be careful not to throw away a good man over a little thing. I said, "Don't call me again." She said, "You can't cut me off. I'm family." I blocked her and stood in the doorway for 5 minutes, listening to silence. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it didn't demand anything of me. At work, my boss pulled me into a conference room to talk about my bandwidth, which is corporate for your soul's capacity to be wrung out, but still perform. I told her I could take the Whitaker account, or I could prepare the board deck. I couldn't do both. She looked me in the eye for a long time, then said, "Take the deck. I'll give Whitaker to Jake." I think she could tell that a part of me was shaking even when I looked motionless. I got my test results back. Clean. I stood in the hallway outside the clinic bathroom and watched a woman adjust her headscarf in the mirror with the kind of care that looks like prayer. I went to my sister's afterwards and let her kids crawl on me while they watched a cartoon about a rescue team of puppies. They kept asking me questions about sharks. They wrapped a sticker around my forearm so tight it cut off circulation a little. Then they fell asleep in weird angles on the couch, and I breathed without counting. He texted photos of the apartment he found. He said it was temporary, that he was looking for a therapist of his own. He sent a screenshot of an email to his HR department requesting a transfer away from her. He sent me a blurry selfie of him holding a box labeled kitchen. Forced smile. Eyes swollen. I didn't reply. I didn't ask about her. I looked at Arthur's desk in accounting 2 days later and learned he knew everything because she told someone who told someone, and I was behind the curve on my own life. People do that. They build a story for you while you're still in the middle of doing dishes. He wrote me a letter. He left it on my car windshield under the wiper. It was 6 pages long, handwritten in the neat print he uses when he wants to look earnest. He apologized for the 1,000th time. He said he loved me. He said he had never loved anyone like me. He said he had been weak. He told on himself without realizing. The small jokes, the ways he brought her up in stories and then edited her out for me. He framed himself as someone who had been seduced by an alluring world that didn't belong to us. I read it at the dining table. I folded it back up and put it in a drawer, not because I wanted to hold on to it, but because throwing it in the trash felt like the kind of drama I was trying to subtract from my life. I met someone at a friend's house 6 months later, at a March birthday party where the piñata was shaped like a taco, and the kids hit it so hard it fell off the string prematurely. He was there because he had gone to high school with the birthday girl's husband. He was quiet in a way that didn't feel like withholding. He watched the kids with an expression that looked like he didn't mind being covered in sugar dust and confetti. He had a scar on his chin from when he fell off a bike at 17. We were both holding paper plates of street tacos when he said, without turning it into a question he needed to be right about, "It feels easier to breathe here than most parties." I liked the way he observed instead of performing. We exchanged numbers because I asked if he could recommend a mechanic. He texted me a list of 3. He added, "If you want, I can go with you to check out the place. My cousin used to work there. They treat people right." He did go with me, and I didn't quite understand why it made something unfurl inside me, watching a man say, "No, that's fine, thanks," to the upsell pitch without adding the little apology laugh men sometimes use when they say no to women in service roles. We went for coffee after. We talked about dumb things we were surprisingly passionate about. His conviction that automatic hand dryers are a conspiracy to spread dampness. My hatred of countertop microwaves. He listened. He asked good questions. He didn't tell me who I was. When we said goodbye, he didn't move towards me like a man assuming he had earned anything. He asked me out the next week. I said yes. We sat in a booth at a place with a checkerboard floor and waitresses who called everyone honey. He told me his sister was in recovery and his dad had taught him to build bookshelves that don't wobble. I told him my mother likes to fold towels with the edges tucked under so the shelf looks clean. I told him I used to believe that if a shelf looked clean, everything else would follow. I didn't tell him about my ex that night. I told him later, on a walk past the mural of the river otter wearing a crown that an artist painted on the back wall of the library. I told him I was not a mess. I was tired. He said, "Tired is honest." He didn't tell me he could fix me. He didn't tell me he never gets tired. He said, "We can be 2 tired people walking the same direction if you want." He reached for my hand without gripping like a handshaking contest. I held it. My hand didn't feel like a prop. The first time my ex saw me with him was at the Saturday market. I was buying peaches from a farmer who swore by bruises as taste indicators. My ex walked up with that public smile glued on, the one he uses in lobbies. He said my name like a question and a warning. I said his name back like a syllable I had practiced in speech therapy. He looked at the man next to me. He stuck out his hand and introduced himself. My ex shook it. He asked how I was. He asked in that way that only cares about the answer in terms of measuring it against his own suffering. "I'm good," I said, and left it there. I didn't ask him anything. We didn't do the thing where 2 people who used to share everything do a ritual exchange of superficial updates like hostages trading stamps. He stood there too long. The farmer lifted a second bag of peaches onto the counter and asked if we wanted both, as if moving fruit might move us along. I paid. We left. My new boyfriend, calling him that still felt like trying on someone else's sweatshirt, didn't comment in the car. He turned on the radio and let some old Motown song fill the air. He didn't try to own the narrative. We drove home with the windows down. We moved in together after a year. It wasn't a grand plan. His lease was up. My house felt too big for one person and a dog. We painted one wall a color his sister called stolen library book. We built a bookshelf that didn't wobble. He taught me to drill anchors without stripping the screw. We ate dinner at a makeshift table between boxes for 3 nights and pretended we were camping. My sister's kids drew a picture of our dog with 4 hats stacked on his head, and we taped it to the fridge. My ex texted me the day I posted one photo online of my boyfriend holding a pie at Thanksgiving. with an expression of concentration I loved. The text said, "So you've moved on." There was no question mark. I didn't reply. He emailed me 2 days later. Subject line, closure. He asked to meet to talk like adults. He used phrases like tie up loose ends and mutual respect. I agreed to meet in daylight at a coffee shop across from the dentist office. Neutral ground where there would be too many people getting fillings to make a scene. He wore a sweater I had bought him and a look like he had rehearsed this speech in the mirror. He said maybe we got married too young. He said he had childhood things he never faced. He said it wasn't about me. He said he forgave me for shutting him out. He wanted me to forgive him for letting someone into our marriage like a draft through a badly sealed window. I don't need to forgive you to move on, I said. I'm moved. I'm on. He blinked like that sentence made a physical impression on him. He said he hoped I was happy. He said he hoped I didn't punish my next partner for what he did. I said that wasn't what was happening. I stood up. I left the untouched coffee on the table. I walked past the front desk of the dentist office where a little girl was choosing a sticker from a plastic fishbowl and thought about how sometimes we get small prizes just for surviving something with our mouths open. His mother sent me a letter after we finalized the divorce. It was written on stationery with embossed birds. It said she was praying for my hardened heart. She said I broke the covenant. She said women in her day had more grit. She said I was going to regret this when I was old and alone. I put the letter in a stack of documents I needed to shred, not because it had power over me, but because I didn't feel like giving it any performance value by ripping it in half at my kitchen counter. I adopted a practice with things like that. The drawer for what doesn't deserve ceremony. I proposed to my boyfriend. It wasn't that he wouldn't have, but he's slower in the way that makes you trust the pace. We were in the kitchen on a Sunday morning, wearing socks with holes while we waited for coffee. I slid a ring box across the counter, and he laughed because he thought I bought earrings. He opened it and cried without needing to announce it. He said yes. We got married in a small ceremony in a park I used to run laps in when I needed to convince myself I was moving even when I felt stuck. My sister's kids walked the dog down the aisle because someone needed a job that made them feel important. We ate cake under a tree. His sister danced with a cousin's toddler while holding her chips like they were a separate partner. The sun did that thing where it comes through leaves and makes patterns on the ground that don't mean anything except the world is doing what it does whether we notice or not. No foreshadowing, just that day. 2 months later, the woman my ex slept with messaged me. It was a long message with apologies like confetti and some defensive details threaded through. She said she had been told we were separated when it started. She said she felt used. She said she quit the job and started working somewhere else where no one knew her mess. She said she was scared she'd see me in public and I'd hate her. She told me she was getting tested regularly, as if we were all citizens in the same bleak country. She said she had started therapy. She didn't ask me to respond, but she left the door open like people do when they want absolution, or at least a nod from the other side of the street. I didn't write back right away. I sat with a message. I asked myself if there was anything I wanted from that exchange. I didn't want to become the kind of person who performs forgiveness because it earns them points in a comment section. I also didn't want to become the person who never says anything because silence feels like power. I waited a week. I wrote back 1 paragraph. I told her I didn't hate her. I told her it hurt. I told her to take care of herself in ways that didn't make anyone else smaller. I didn't offer anything beyond that because we were not in each other's lives. We were satellites that collided and spun off with dents. My mother and I had a fight about it at Thanksgiving because of course we had a fight about it. She said she stayed through worse, and look at her now, 42 years married. She said it like an award and a sentence. I asked if she was happy. She said happiness is a slippery word. She said commitment matters more. She said endurance proves love. I told her endurance proves endurance. She set down the gravy boat with a firmness that made the mashed potatoes tremble. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the meal except to ask if I wanted pie. She texted me later that night a recipe for a casserole. It was the closest she comes to I care. My new husband and I had our first real fight about money. He and I keep different budgets in our heads. Mine is a spreadsheet with conditional formatting. His is a mason jar system he tries to translate into digital form. He spent $300 on a set of chisels without telling me because a woodworker he admires was retiring and selling tools. I spent $200 on a course about conflict styles because I wanted to understand why I shut down in the middle of arguments. We looked at each other across the table and realized we were both spending to feel capable. We didn't resolve it in one night. We took turns apologizing for tone. We chose a joint account for bills and personal accounts for indulgences, and we set a number at which we promised to check with the other person. We broke it once each, and we didn't act like it meant we were incompatible. We took a Saturday to build a bench. We argued about whether the pocket holes should face the wall or the room. We drank warm beer. We ended up turning the bench around, laughing because the wrong decision was obvious immediately, and there was no need to defend it anymore. I saw my ex at a funeral. A mutual friend died suddenly, and grief erases fences in a way that feels brutal and holy. He was there with a woman I didn't know. She held his hand like it had crossed a desert. He looked thinner. He nodded at me from across the room. I nodded back. We stood in line to hug the parents, and no one said the wrong thing for once. Outside, he walked towards me, paws already in his shoulders, and I braced without looking like I was bracing. I wanted to say, he said, I'm sober. He meant sober from her. Or maybe he meant alcohol. I didn't ask. He said, I'm getting better. He said it like a man who needed someone to witness that he was still here. I said, I hope you are. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't spite. It was 2 people who knew what the other smelled like after a run, and now were just names you could put on an envelope. The biggest twist didn't feel like a twist when it happened. It was just a Tuesday, and my therapist asked, what do you trust now? And I realized I could answer. I trust that I will tell the truth. I trust that if the ground moves, I will put my feet where they need to go without asking the earth to stop being earth. I trust that I am allowed to like small things. The way my husband dries a pan without leaving streaks, the line of heat on a late afternoon car seat, the click of the dog's nails on the hallway floor when he decides he has to supervise bathroom trips like a unionized foreman. We had a setback when my mother landed in the hospital for a heart procedure and asked me to call my ex because he always knew how to calm me down. I told her no. She cried. She said I was punishing everyone for my ego. I told her she could be cared for without me rewinding my life. She hung up. I went to the hospital anyway because she's my mother, and she looked small in the bed with a blanket that felt like paper. She squeezed my hand. She said, "You're stubborn." I said, "I'm consistent." The nurse asked if we wanted extra pillows. We did. I held her cup while she drank watered-down juice. We didn't talk about my ex. We talked about her white tennis shoes from 1995. She made me promise to throw away the pair in her closet with a hole in the toe. I promised. We got a puppy because grief and joy often arrive in the same decade and make you rearrange furniture. Our older dog accepted the interloper with a deep sigh and a resigned acceptance of chaos. The puppy chewed a corner of the bookcase we built together, and instead of turning it into a metaphor for ruin, we sanded it down and put a plant in front of it. We hosted a barbecue. People from different parts of our lives sat on the same patio furniture and didn't look like they were performing. Someone spilled beer and cleaned it up without telling me. It felt like a minor miracle. On our second anniversary, I opened a drawer and found the letter from my ex under a stack of warranties for appliances. I had forgotten it was there. I took it out. I read the first 2 lines. I put it back in the drawer and thought, I can shred this now. I didn't do it immediately. I made dinner. I listened to my husband tell a story about a coworker who tried to microwave fish in the office. We laughed until the dog stood up and came over to check if we were okay. After we ate, I went to the drawer. I fed the letter into the shredder. It made a steady chewing sound. I ran the strips through my fingers. They felt like nothing I could put back together, and not because I wouldn't know how, but because I didn't want to. My ex texted a year later to say his father had died. He asked if I could call because he didn't know who else to reach out to. I didn't owe him that, and I didn't need to protect myself from it. I called. We talked for 8 minutes. He told me when the service was. He told me his sister was not speaking to him. He told me the hospice nurse had been kind. I told him my mother still folded towels like magazine photos. We hung up. I walked back into the kitchen, and my husband handed me a dish towel without asking what I needed from him. It wasn't a test, and there was no right answer, and it was still exactly right. The people pleaser in me, the one who used to collect guilt like rocks, still shows up. I still over-explain sometimes. I still try to win arguments by being more reasonable. Therapy didn't erase my wiring. It just gave me a breaker switch. When I feel the current surge, I can flip it off and sit down. I can choose a walk. I can text my sister a picture of a duck, and she'll respond with a duck she saw at her kid's soccer field. I can sit on my own porch and watch it get dark without narrating it to anybody. The day I felt something like peace was not spectacular. I was at the grocery store buying cilantro and dish soap. A song came on that used to be the soundtrack to a terrible road trip I took with my ex's family, where his father yelled at the van's GPS like it was a disobedient child. The chord progression has a way of making the brain think something important is happening. It played over the speakers while a teenager bagged my groceries and apologized for bruising the tomatoes. I told him it was fine. He said they only trained them for 3 hours and then let them loose on produce like wild animals. I laughed. On the way out, an older woman asked if I could reach the top shelf to get a jar of pickles. I did. She said, "Thank you, baby," the way strangers do in this city. I walked to my car listening to the crunch of gravel under the cart. It felt like structure. It felt like something that didn't need me to translate it into meaning. I came home and put the cilantro in a glass of water like my grandmother taught me because it lasts longer that way. I kissed my husband in a doorway because doorways make good places to pause. The dog stole a sock and raced down the hall in victory. I opened the mail. A flyer for a new hotel downtown slid out and onto the counter. I put it in the recycling without thinking. There was no sting. There was no performance. It was paper advertising beds I will never sleep in, selling sunsets that belong to everyone. I used to think resolution would feel like triumph, like a curtain rising or a judge banging a gavel. It feels like washing your hands and not needing to scrub. It feels like surrounding yourself with people who do not require you to abandon yourself to stay. It feels like using the good knives on a weeknight. Here's the last thing I'll say because this is already longer than any stranger owes me attention. I didn't get a new life. I got this one again, rearranged. I keep my own name in my mouth like something you have to remember to chew. When people ask how I knew what to do, I tell them I didn't. I did not know. I just made a choice in a laundry room, holding a receipt that smelled like sunscreen, and then I made another one in a kitchen that smelled like lemon, and another one in a clinic, and another one in a lawyer's office, and another one under a tree. None of those choices were clean. None of them had a guarantee. The only thing I can say with any certainty is that I didn't leave myself behind this time. We're fine. Not in the way people say fine and mean anything else. We're fine like the crack in a ceramic bowl that got filled with gold. Not because we wanted to display our fractures, but because we wanted to keep eating out of the bowl. We still get hungry. We still buy cilantro and forget about it in the crisper drawer sometimes. We still argue about the right way to load the dishwasher and kiss in doorways and silence group texts. There are no extra points. There are only mornings, and we keep getting them, and I keep waking up inside my own life.